He stormed into the store red-faced and furious, waving a crumpled piece of paper like it was a death sentence. His voice was sharp, cracked with rage, every syllable echoing across the aisles of blinking electronics and buzzing fluorescent lights. Customers froze, coworkers looked up nervously, and for a second I thought he might start breaking things. I'd seen angry people before. Phones that didn't work, bills they didn't understand, charges they thought were defective. But this was different. His fury was volcanic, his veins bulging as he shouted about being scammed, cheated, robbed. That was the day karma knocked on his door. That was the day I realized sometimes revenge doesn't need a grand plan. Sometimes it just needs you to step aside and let it unfold. But before that moment, before the shouting and the bill that would change everything, we need to rewind. Back to the time when Radio Shacks still existed in every strip mall, when shelves were crammed with cables no one could name, and cell phones were clunky little bricks that made you feel futuristic just for owning one. It was a world of plastic packaging, the faint chemical smell of new electronics, and posters promising the next generation of mobile technology. I was 18 years old, still figuring out who I was. My uniform never sat right. My name tag was scratched, and most mornings I showed up with bloodshot eyes, still carrying the haze of whatever I'd smoked the night before. But even through that fog, I was good at my job. I didn't talk down to people the way some sales reps did. When a confused dad came in with his kid's broken flip phone, I explained things in plain language. When an elderly woman couldn't figure out how to send a text, I walked her through the steps with patience. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to survive, to pass the hours, to feel useful in a world where I otherwise felt invisible. Outside of work, life was predictable in the way youth often is. A small circle of friends, cheap booze, long nights of laughter, and that sense of invincibility that comes before adulthood smacks you in the face. We were a group that balanced each other. A couple of jokesters, one or two serious types, the planners, the reckless ones. We weren't perfect, but we were a family of sorts. And like every family, we had someone who didn't belong but never seemed to leave. His name was Dave. Dave wasn't a friend. Not really. He was more like a shadow that insisted on following us, attaching himself to our gatherings whether we wanted him there or not. He was the kind of guy who'd already be drunk when he showed up, eyes glassy, breath sour, carrying that restless, angry energy that made you uneasy. He'd slap you too hard on the back, interrupt your conversations, puff out his chest like he was waiting for someone to challenge him. Every group has a Dave, that one guy who thinks he's the life of the party, but is really the reason everyone wants to leave early. I'd known him for years, long enough to recognize the pattern. In school, he was the bully who picked fights with smaller kids just to feel bigger. At parties, he was the one who pushed people until they snapped. By 18, everyone had grown tired of him. Some had already cut him off completely, treating him like a cancer to be avoided. But old habits die hard, and sometimes, out of nostalgia or pity, we still let him slip in. That's exactly what happened one night. We weren't throwing some massive blowout, just a small get-together, 9 or 10 of us crowded in a friend's kitchen, music low, the smell of beer hanging in the air. We were laughing, swapping stories, just try to relax. Then the door opened without a knock, without an invitation, and there was Dave, staggering in with his crooked smirk, already reeking of booze. Nobody said anything. We never did. But you could feel the mood shift instantly, like a shadow falling across the room. Within 20 minutes, the peace was gone. Dave had started barking insults, mocking someone's laugh, bumping shoulders with anyone who didn't move fast enough. His words got louder, his movements sloppier, and we all knew it was only a matter of time. Then it happened. He lunged, trying to sucker punch one of the quieter guys, a kid who never hurt anyone. The swing was clumsy, fueled by alcohol and arrogance. He missed completely. Time seemed to slow as his body pitched forward. His feet tangled, his arms flailed, and then with a sickening smack, he crashed face first into the kitchen floor. Everyone froze for half a heartbeat. Then the laughter burst out, uncontainable. His body sprawled awkwardly, limbs bent, his cheek pressed against linoleum. And that's when it happened, the moment that changed everything. From his pocket slid a gleaming new cell phone. skidding across the floor until it stopped right at my feet. I bent down and picked it up, the room around me buzzing with suppressed laughter. It wasn't just any phone. This was one of those early smartphones, bulky with a mechanical keyboard, not sleek yet, but futuristic enough to make you feel important for owning one. The kind of device people brag about, showing off ringtones and pixelated photos. And now it was in my hands. Dave was too drunk to notice. His groans filled the kitchen as he tried to push himself off the floor, but all eyes were on me and the phone. I turned it over, thumb hovering over the buttons, and felt that mischievous grin spread across my face. The others leaned closer, curiosity sparking in their eyes. The phone passed from hand to hand, each person giggling as they poked through settings, changing small things, leaving behind traces of our collective mockery. When it came back to me, I scrolled through the ringtones. That's when inspiration struck. My fingers flew across the keypad until I found it. The booming, unmistakable voice of Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings declaring, "You shall not pass." I couldn't help but laugh as I set it as Dave's ringtone. Around me, my friends cracked up, the sound echoing like we just pulled off the prank of the century. For a brief moment, the tension lifted, replaced with that giddy thrill of shared rebellion. I handed the phone back, and we moved on. Dave eventually stumbled out, too drunk to realize his phone had been tampered with. To me, it was nothing more than a silly prank, a harmless jab at someone who seemed incapable of taking a hint. I didn't think about it again. Not for days, not for weeks. Life went on, work, parties, the slow creep toward graduation. Dave faded back into background, the same nuisance he'd always been. But pranks have a way of rippling outward, turning into something bigger than you ever imagined. And what started as a joke that night would soon transform into the most expensive lesson Dave had ever learned. A lesson that I, for once, had the power to undo, but chose not to, because sometimes the sweetest revenge is silence. Sometimes it's simply letting the universe do what it does best. For a while, I forgot all about that night. Life had a rhythm to it. Work shifts at Radio Shack, late-night runs for greasy fast food, and those endless conversations with friends about what the future might look like. College plans, road trips, new jobs. We were moving forward, even if in small ways. Everyone was trying to figure out what adulthood meant. Everyone except Dave. Dave stayed exactly the same. He clung to his high school glory days like they were still happening, like the world hadn't already moved on without him. At gatherings, he was still that loud, sloppy drunk. He never talked about jobs or plans or anything meaningful. He only talked about fights he'd won, people he'd owned, or the ridiculous amount he'd supposedly drunk the night before. It was exhausting. Even when he wasn't around, he was a shadow over our group, the name that made us groan when someone said, "I think Dave might be coming." He was the kind of guy who tested your patience in every way possible. One time, he borrowed money for booze and never paid it back. Another time, he broke someone's favorite CD and laughed about it. If you called him out, he'd puff up his chest, daring you to make something of it. He was a leech, a parasite, feeding off our tolerance because we were too polite, or maybe too spineless, to finally tell him to get lost for good. But little did we know, the universe was already preparing his downfall. It started quietly, with that one small change I made to his phone. Gandalf's booming voice declaring, "You shall not pass," became the soundtrack to his calls and messages. At first, that was the whole joke. I didn't even think about it after the night ended. But someone else must have. At some point in that phone's journey around the room, one of my friends decided to go further. They figured out how to download the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy onto his phone. 3 massive movies in what, at the time, was considered high definition. Now, you've got to understand the context. Back then, data wasn't like it is today. It was expensive, astronomically expensive. The tiniest mistake, accidentally opening a web page or streaming a clip, could rack up charges that made people's jaws drop. And Dave, in his drunken ignorance, had no idea what had been done to his shiny new toy. That phone, stuffed to the brim with movies it couldn't handle, was a ticking time bomb. 2 weeks passed. I barely gave him a thought. Then, on an otherwise normal day, I was working the counter at Radio Shack, helping a couple figure out which charger fit their phone, when the door slammed open. The bell above it rattled violently, and in he came. Dave. But this wasn't the usual smug, half-drunk version of him. No, this was a man in full meltdown. His face was flush beet red, his eyes bloodshot, his hands shaking as he clutched a folded sheet of paper. His voice boomed across the store, loud enough that customers froze mid-step, and my co-workers peeked out from the back room. "This is bullshit," he shouted, slamming the paper onto the counter in front of me. "They screwed me. Bell screwed me. I want this fixed right now." I blinked, taken aback. What happened?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, even though I already felt the heat of secondhand embarrassment creeping up my neck. "What happened?" he barked, eyes wide with fury. "What happened is these idiots at Bell charged me $3,500 for data I didn't use. $3,500. I don't even know how to download movies. This is fraud. Fraud." Customers nearby exchanged glances, whispering to each other. My co-workers ducked back, clearly not want to be anywhere near the explosion. I picked up the paper he'd slammed down. Sure enough, it was a phone bill, itemized with hundreds upon hundreds of dollars in charges. My eyes scanned the list and then stopped. There was massive downloads, gigabytes of data, enough to fill his phone completely. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. That night, the phone, the prank, Gandalf's voice echoing in the kitchen, and then the realization someone had gone further than me. Someone had actually downloaded the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. Not only had it devoured his phone storage, it had drained his data plan dry, leaving behind a bill big enough to crush anyone's wallet. Inside, I felt a mix of shock, disbelief, and something darker, satisfaction. Day had been awful to everyone for years. He had caused nothing but misery, embarrassment, and anger. And now here he was red-faced, veins bulging, screaming about injustice. For the first time, the joke wasn't on us. It was on him. Out loud, though, I kept my composure. "That's a pretty big bill," I said slowly. "Looks like there was a lot of downloading here." "I didn't download anything." Dave roared. His fist slammed against the counter, making pens jump. "I don't even watch movies on my phone. This is a screw-up, and I'm not paying a damn cent." I nodded, pretending to look thoughtful, even concerned. But in my chest, a strange calm settled, because in that moment, I realized something. I had the power to fix this. I'd done it before, countless times, for other customers. One call to Bell, one explanation about accidental downloads, and the charges would vanish. I could make this nightmare disappear for him. But why should I? He had spent his entire life walking over people, pushing them down, humiliating them just to feel big. He had been the shadow that haunted our group, the one we couldn't shake. And now, finally, the universe had turned the tables. His arrogance, his recklessness, his inability to care about anyone else. It had all led him here. $3,500 in debt, and no one to blame but himself. I slid the paper back across the counter and forced a polite smile. "Well," I said softly, "you'll need call Bell directly. Their customer service line is right here on the bill. They'll be able to help you." The look on his face was priceless. Shock, disbelief, betrayal. He had expected me to save him, to wave some magic wand and erase his problem. But I didn't move. I didn't reach for the phone. I just stood there, calm, while his world crumbled. He grabbed the paper, crumpled it tighter in his fist, and stormed out of the store, his curses trailing behind him. Customers stared, co-workers whispered, but me? I just felt an eerie calm. For once, justice had been served. Dave didn't just leave the store quietly that day. No, he made sure everyone within 50 feet knew how unfair life was to him. He slammed the door so hard the glass rattled, cursed loud enough to make a kid cover his ears, and stomped off into the parking lot like a toddler throwing a tantrum. For a long moment afterward, the store was dead silent. Then, slowly, customers began whispering. Co-workers exchanged knowing looks, and I just stood there behind the counter, heart racing, pretending to be busy with a stack of receipts. On the outside, I was calm. On the inside, My thoughts were running wild. Because here was the truth. I could have helped him. I knew exactly how to make that bill disappear. At Radio Shack, I'd seen nightmare phone bills more times than I could count. Data was ridiculously overpriced back then, and people fell into traps constantly. Opening one wrong web page, downloading something by accident, forgetting to turn off roaming. Customers would show up horrified, waiving bills for hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars. And you know what? With the right words, with the right phone call, most of it could be wiped clean. A little insider knowledge, a little patience, and suddenly the non-refundable charges vanished. I'd done it before. An elderly couple once came in almost in tears because their grandson had streamed cartoons on their flip phone, and it racked up a $300 charge. I got it erased in 10 minutes. Another time, a single mom came in shaking because she'd accidentally left data running while traveling, and she couldn't afford the $500 bill that landed in her mailbox. I fixed it. She hugged me afterward. I had the power. All it would have taken was one call, one explanation, and Dave would have been free. But standing there, looking at that crumpled paper and remembering the years of chaos he dragged into our lives, I realized something. I didn't want to help him. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty about it either, because this wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was karma. Every memory of Dave's antics came rushing back to me. The time he picked a fight with a kid 2 grades younger and left him with a bloody nose. The time he showed up drunk at someone's birthday and ruined the cake by smashing it with his fist as a joke. The time he mocked one of our friends so viciously she left in tears. Every single moment he'd stolen joy from someone else. Every scar he left behind, they all piled up in my chest. And now, finally, here was balance. He wanted me to save him. He expected me to swoop in and erase his consequences like I'd always done for other people. But why should he get that kindness? Why should someone who thrived on cruelty get the same forgiveness I'd given to people who genuinely didn't deserve their bad luck? As he raged and cursed, I made my decision. I kept my face neutral, my voice polite, and slid the bill back across the counter. "You'll have to call Bell directly," I said softly. "The number's right here. They'll handle it." It was such a simple sentence. But the impact, it was like I had told him the world had ended. His eyes went wide, his jaw clenched, and for a second I thought he might lunge across the counter at me. He sputtered, pointing a finger, but no words came out. He just stood there, vibrating with disbelief, before snatching the paper back and storming out. I should have felt guilty. That's what you're supposed to feel when you refuse to help someone, right? Especially when you can help them. But I didn't. Instead, I felt a strange kind of peace, like the scales had finally tipped the way they were supposed to. Over the next few days, I started hearing the fallout. Word travels fast in small circles, especially when drama is involved. One friend mentioned Dave was scrambling to borrow money, asking anyone he thought still owed him a favor. Another said he was blaming Bell, screaming about suing them, threatening to take them down. But everyone knew the truth. Nobody believed him. For once, nobody was on his side. And me? I kept quiet. I went to work, rang up chargers and batteries, explained contracts to nervous parents. But in the back of my mind, I pictured Dave pacing his room, red-faced, clutching that bill, begging anyone, to make it go away. I imagined him on hold with Bell's customer service, shouting at some poor representative who probably muted the call to laugh with their co-workers. I imagined him realizing slowly, painfully, that there was no easy escape. That image stayed with me, and it felt like justice. Sweet, simple justice. Because here's the thing. Some people only learn through pain. They can't hear reason. They can't see kindness. They can't recognize patience. They plow through life assuming they're untouchable, that someone else will always clean up their mess. Dave had spent years being that person. But now the mess was his alone. And I was more than happy to let him drown in it. I wish I could say there was some big confrontation after that he came back to scream at me again, that he tried to fight me, that I got to deliver some dramatic speech about karma. But that's not how it went. He avoided me after that day, maybe because deep down he knew I'd had the power to save him and chose not to. Maybe because humiliation burned hotter than rage. All I know is that I never saw him the same way again. He wasn't scary anymore. He wasn't even annoying. He was just pathetic. And the best part? I didn't lift a finger. Sometimes revenge isn't about elaborate schemes or dramatic takedowns. Sometimes it's about restraint, about standing still and watching as the universe finally catches up to someone who's been running from accountability their entire life. That's what I did. And it was more satisfying than anything I could have planned. Weeks turned into months, and the story of Dave's $3,500 disaster spread like wildfire through our circle of friends. At first, it was whispers. "Did you hear what happened to Dave?" Followed by muffled laughter. But soon, it wasn't whispers anymore. It was a running joke. At parties, someone would casually drop, "Careful, don't let Dave near your phone or you'll end up with another $3,000 bill." The room would erupt in laughter, and Dave, red-faced in the corner, would storm out like he always did. It was poetic. For years, Dave had been the guy who got his entertainment by humiliating others. He'd pick the weakest target, spotlight them, and squeeze until they cracked. Now, the spotlight was on him. And no matter how he squirmed, he couldn't shake it off. I remember one night especially. A few of us were hanging out at someone's basement, playing cards, cheap beer on the table, music buzzing in the background. Out of nowhere, someone leaned over and asked, "So, Dave, did Belt ever let you off the hook?" The whole room froze, everyone waiting. Dave's face twisted, his jaw locked, and then, without a word, he threw his cards down and stormed upstairs. A beat of silence followed, and then we all burst out laughing. It was cruel, maybe, but it felt like justice. For once, he wasn't the predator. He was a punchline. And here's the thing. Dave never bounced back. Not from that. The bill broke him in ways I didn't expect. He dropped out of school the next year, claimed he was taking time off. But we all knew the truth. He was drowning in debt, and it weighed on him like an anchor. He stopped showing up to parties, stopped calling people, stopped being the loud, obnoxious center of attention. He faded, slowly, painfully, and none of us rushed to pull him back into the light. Because why would we? He'd had chance after chance to be better, to be kind, to at least stop tearing other people down. And every time, he chose cruelty. So when karma finally came calling with a bill in his name, we all stepped aside and let it ring. As for me, I never told anyone the full truth. I never told him I could have saved him with one phone call, one trick, one string of magic words to customer service. I kept that to myself. Watching him unravel while knowing I held the key all along, that was my quiet revenge. Years later, I ran into him once at a grocery store. He looked older than he should have, tired, beaten down. His clothes hung loose on him, his eyes dull. He barely made eye contact as we passed each other in the aisle. For a split second, I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered every cruel laugh, every tear he caused, every moment he made someone else feel small just to make himself feel big. And I walked away without a word. Because here's the truth. Revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's refusing to rescue the person who never once rescued anyone else. Sometimes it's letting them carry the full weight of their actions until it crushes them. That's what happened to Dave. And to this day, I don't regret it. Not for a second. And if this story gave you chills, make sure to like and subscribe, because more real revenge stories just like this are coming your way.